Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road Podcast. I'm your host Chris, alongside my co-host Dean, and joining us today for our conversation is Susie from the Susie Ideally channel. And today, Susie has a topic for us, a pretty morbid one. And I really didn't know how to introduce it, but we're going to be talking about death today. So we're probably going to touch on, different customs, our personal experiences. People are so obsessed with death, the concept of it, and maybe touch a little bit on what we think happens when we die. But how are you doing today, Susie?
I'm well and really excited to be back. Thank you so much for having me. Definitely going to be a morbid episode today, but it's just been something that's been on my mind. So, yeah, excited to dig deep into it with you guys.
Yep, we're glad to have you back. How are you doing, Dean?
I'm hanging in there, man. Today, this has been a whirlwind of a morning. So we recorded a podcast yesterday. That was a great one. But this morning, we, kind of just like running around, finishing up the work week and picking my mom up from an appointment. And my daughter had an accident last night. So like trying to like throw everything into the washing machine at once. And I'm finally sat down. I got my coffee, I got my breakfast, and I'm ready to talk about death.
But before we get started with today's show, yep, Dean is right. We did record another podcast yesterday, being the 14th, which was our first listener submission. So they sent their stories to us via email. So if you would like to have an episode dedicated to your story, please reach out to us at our email address of twroadpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to have you on as a guest on the show so you could share the story yourself. Or if you submit it to us via email, we'll make an episode dedicated to your story. Again, the email address is twroadpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And with that, we'll start today's show. So I'm going to come to you first, Susie. You said death has been on your mind. Why don't you go into that a little bit? I hope it's not as bad as it sounds.
Sounds a little unhealthy, but okay.
Where are the plans for murdering your husband? You can share them with us.
He's not there yet. Soon.
Yet.
Yet.
We're kidding. If any law enforcement's listening to this, we're not serious.
Yeah, so this is so I never really growing up, healthy, blah blah blah. We're all pretty privileged. We have everything we need. We don't really think about death. In fact, we think we're invincible. But then during COVID a few years ago, I was just talking with my husband. It was still that time that everything was really unknown. And he just casually said, yeah, if we're not careful, we get COVID, we'll just die, we're dead. And then you're just erased from life forever. And I don't know why, but when he said we're going to be erased from life, that just reframed the way I thought about death. It's like, we don't really think about like what happens when we die, but we're really just going to be gone. Like we cease to exist. And like, what do we live for? Like we can like die tomorrow for all we know. Then everything that we've worked for, there's really no point. All the money we're trying to save, like we can just get into a freak accident the next day, or we can catch COVID, which some people did, and pass away. And so I just spiraled during that time. And ever since then, I never thought about it the same way. And plus, you guys talk about a lot of, crimes in this podcast. And a lot of the times it ends with somebody dying and we don't really think about the victim. We just know that they die, but they're gone. They're gone forever. So that's really how it started.
I know it. I've struggled as well with, especially getting older. But I think the three of us are pretty similar in terms of our depth of reflection and stuff like that. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I've thought about this stuff when I was much younger. Like, I was thinking about stuff like this that was way too heavy for a kid to be thinking about. And I feel like that really challenged me in a way. But if I can give you a glimmer of hope, because I did used to think similarly, like, okay, we're here, we don't know what happens after we die. There's a good chance, or there's a scientific chance that we're just done. We didn't exist at one point before, and then we came to existence, and then we're going to go back to not existing. It seems like that'll be meaningless, right? But then I heard an awesome quote, and this is actually kind of stemmed from Family Guy, which is really funny. There's this old episode, like, I say old because I think it was like maybe 5 or 6, maybe even 7 years ago. There was an episode where there's just a little minor joke where, like, Peter's singing like to a bunch of kids, and of course it's very morbid. He's like something like, well, if we're all special, then that means that not everyone is really special because we're all equally not special. And it's just like saying like how everyone's special and kind of sniping that. But if you think about that from a different perspective with like death and life in the universe, we could have, there are literally like billions and billions, maybe even trillions of human beings who could have existed, like the structure of the DNA that could have been possible to make a human. So most people that could have ever existed scientifically or like theoretically never will exist. So the fact that we're here and alive, even if it goes away, is just like that. Like, to me, that gives like kind of a golden lining to the whole thing. And I know you can also talk about some different perspectives about like, well, there's a lot of suffering, and not everybody who comes to this life experiences, like you said, Susie, like a really good baseline. So that there is some sadness, I guess, to that. But at the same time, it's like the fact that we're here talking to each other and sharing similar experiences, and we could have easily been one of the trillions who, genetically never made it out of the womb or made it into existence. So that is, I think that's awesome. So that there's some hope there. But I guess I was getting off tangent a little bit, from the death perspective, the death aspect. Do you have anything to add to what Susie said, Chris, like her initial take on it?
I wanted to say that I really did resonate with what she was saying, specifically with the concept of, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, in the grand scheme of the world, you think about how many people have lived and died. And, for all intents and purposes, at this point in our lives, we are just another cog in the machine, in the sense that we are not famous. We're not influencers. We're not these
yet.
Damn
it, Chris.
Yet. Right. So we're not, for example, we're not like Napoleon. We're not like Julius Caesar. We're not like Steve Jobs. We're not one of these people in which, when they pass away, they leave some sort of legacy. And I'm talking about, at this moment in time, 99.999% of the people, they're born, they live their life, and then they die. And most of them are completely forgotten. Have you ever driven past a very old cemetery, and where the stones are just tilted and there's moss growing over it, and it's just all weathered to the point where you can't see the names and you could barely make out the dates, and like you wonder who these people are, because when you think back on it, like, these people were just like us.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, and I don't mean to get so philosophical here, but like, what is the purpose? Do we just, like, are we here just to be here? Because, like, what are we doing that actually matters in the grand scheme of things? You know that? Not that you know that, you know what I mean? Like, what is the point? So, for example, some of us work in tech, some of us work in marketing. Everything that we do, everything that we accomplish, it's a personal goal. But in the grand scheme of things, if you think about it 200 years from now, does it really fucking matter? Like, everything that everyone is stressing over, it's all made up by us. It's all stress induced by our own creations and our own minds. And it's like, what the fuck is the point when you really deep it and think about it? Like, why am I really doing this? And then I die. And people mourn for a week or two, Your spouse will probably mourn longer because you've been with them for so long. But everyone else will just go about their daily fucking routine. And I talked about this with my wife about a week ago. It's like people will be sad. They'll cry over you. And then all of a sudden, you'll only come up if you pop up in a picture or conversation or something like that. And that's the grim reality of it. But I'll pass it over to you, Dean. I know you wanted to say something.
I can see the black, like the hair, the long grunge, or like the the goth hair forming, and like the nails and the crying, and
what is the point of life, bro?
As we slowly descend into like childhood gothhood or goth whatever in high school. No, I know it, and I cannot see this conversation not going in a philosophical direction. But the one thing I wanted to say to your other point about this is kind of morbid, adding to the morbidity, but like the concept you threw with like Steve Jobs or Julius Caesar or whatever, like someone who made a really huge impact in the world whose name will hover for many millennia. But don't forget, they too will succumb either through the extinction of humanity or even the evolution of humanity, which I wanted to save that. Well, I'll just mention it briefly because I think we should talk about it at some point. But it's not just the concept of like death, like coming here, being here as in this state and dying. It's also the concept that if you believe in evolution, that 200,000 years ago is when we really started seeing like modern humans as they function today. But everything that came before that and the different structures and layers of what we could kind of perceive are similar to humans, like along the primate route, but then also the other direction. And like a million years from now, if humans manage to stay alive long enough, we will theoretically evolve to a different state, not necessarily a higher state. But imagine that, like maybe that is why, of course, I have to bring it up. Aliens, like, the conversation of aliens and like the evolution of how they played out across the last couple hundred years in human society. But no one throws the question out there, like, how old are they exactly? So if we ever reached a point in humanity where we can like accelerate our DNA, which I'm sure is already being done, and imagine marrying that up with like quantum computing or something where you could literally make the most perfect evolutionary specimen ever based off of the technology you have. And we're almost there. Maybe like 100 years, we'll start being able to pump out, advanced creatures and stuff in real life. So I just imagine, if they are different from us in the future, just as we are so different from those, pre-humans in the past, and they also died, and they believe different things, or they will know different things. They'll have different senses, different ways of interpreting and taking in information. Does that also kind of muddy the waters of what it means to be human, like alive and dead? Or do you think that it, like, we should just specifically within the frame of humanity, like we can't possibly know what's beyond that? I mean, I guess it's hard enough with life and death as humans.
I want to add that, like, Chris, so don't think that we don't matter, because if you watch those time travel movies, you know that if you go back in time, you can't even kill an insect because of the compounding effect that it will have in the future. Like maybe aliens spawn because you killed that one bug when you went back in time. So you're contributing a lot more than you realize. So yeah.
I would like to think so. It's like that butterfly effect thing where you step on you go back in time, step on a blade of grass wrong, and it just sets off this chain effect of everything.
And
which leads to like cats taking over the world or something.
Exactly. And adding to like the cemetery point, that actually freaks me out too, just being forgotten. So I remember seeing a post maybe like on social media that says people die 3 times. First is when they actually die. And then the second is when you're spoke of for the very last time. And then third is when the last person that you know on earth died too. And then you're really dead.
Did you guys ever see the movie Coco? The Disney movie Coco?
Yes.
I love
that movie.
Yeah, it made me It always makes me cry. Susie,
Remember
if you get a
me?
chance, yeah, if you get a chance to watch Coco, like everything you just said is in that movie. It's really good.
Yeah,
I recommend
like
it.
you guys watch all these things I never watched before. Well, I'm the worst person when it comes to pop culture. I don't get a lot of pop culture references.
Let me throw out the gorilla in the room. What do you guys think happens? Like right now, as you exist, like the you that you are right now, everything you've experienced and know. What do you think? What's your sureness level? Like, if you could guess, what do you think happens when you die? I know we can't say like for sure, but like as of right now, what do you think happens when we die?
Well, if so the realist part of me thinks that nothing happens. You really are just dead. You're reduced to a pile of bones on the ground forever. And I don't really like that theory, but that's really the one that I think is probably the most likely scenario. However, the idealist part of me thinks that there's reincarnation. You come back as somebody else. And then there's like a story that I read in passing. It's called The Egg, that kind of captures this. It's about somebody that dies and they meet God, and then the God tells him that like everybody that you've met is just you born from a different timeline. So it's you reincarnated countless times, and everybody that you come across is you. And that just kind of like blew my mind. So I think, yeah, go ahead.
So you are me and I am you.
Exactly, different timelines though.
That's scary. Hey,
Yes.
Dean,
I'm totally What?
I hate you, which means I hate myself.
Well, I love you, which means I love myself, and then I love you, and you love me.
Weirdo.
Okay. Really quick, Susie. What's interesting is I didn't know that story was older, like, written down. I saw that narrative there's this YouTube channel called Kierkegaard. It's this really awesome channel that's been around for a long time, but they basically do these fun narrations about really heavy topics and really complex topics. Some of them are scientific, but one of them is called The Egg. It's my favorite Kierkegaard ever because it's exactly what you're talking about. It's like this concept that when you die, you go up to meet the external consciousness of either yourself or like another being that you're eventually going to become through your experiences. But like the belief in that with the egg is like everything in the universe, like all the experiences that are happening from the lowliest creature that may have some self-awareness or some awareness in general, all the way up to the most advanced, like godlike being that has multiple levels of consciousness or whatever. They all live and die, and they feed this continual pool of consciousness and experience. So eventually the universe is like an evolution to become the next like universe giant or whatever, you know what I mean? Like the whole universe itself is an egg, and it's literally cultivating itself. So when it hatches, all of the experiences, we're all shared experiences, will we become like one, and we will literally become like a god or the traditional theory of what a universal God would be like. I had never thought about that. I'm like, wow, that like I'm not about to start a religion and believing that, but that actually is something that I had never thought about. And Chris, you kind of touched on that in a previous podcast, the idea that like when you die, maybe you get tapped into more knowledge than at this level that our brains can handle, which I don't know. I feel like if that happens, you kind of lose yourself anyway. Like because here's another scary concept really quickly. It's possible that when you die, that Chris, you could be right. Like you could have your consciousness reabsorbed into a larger consciousness. But if that happens and you become like the truer version of your original self, then the self that is in this life actually does kind of die, like, because you're literally mixing everybody to change into a larger being that it's not you by itself. It's everything. So the self is the three of us existing by ourselves separately. I think like either way, even if there's nothing after, either there's nothing after or there's something, we have to go eventually, unless you believe in like the afterlife that's permanent, where you literally get taken out of existence as you are and you stay like that in the afterlife for eternity. which I have a lot of problems with. Like, there's so many things that tear apart with that concept. But I think that that's applicable to the conversation too, because Chris is Christian or Catholic. So like you have, a religion that believes in a permanent afterlife in which you yourself just kind of occupy that space as you are now. So that's kind of another heavy concept we could touch on at one point.
Yeah, and the initial concept that came to mind was not that you just join a collective consciousness with everybody, but it goes off of the concept of reincarnation, in which if you have reincarnated multiple times, when you die, your consciousness rejoins the other ones, if that makes sense. They all still technically belong to you, but then like you rejoin that and it's like, okay, I have this like expanse of knowledge.
Like you have your own thread in life, or
right.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I thought of. But the whole coming together like a hive, I'm like, no, I'm not fond of that. That would really suck, because it would be like, what's the purpose of my individuality if when I die, my consciousness just goes and meshes together with another one? It'd be kind of crappy to me.
I know, it's not fun to think about. We wouldn't be able to enjoy our pizza video games for the rest of time, because we would be eating Schlorgborg and playing Glip Glop from Planet Zolar more often than we'd be eating. Because I mean, think about it. If there are different consciousness across the universe, then that would also have to feed the universal collective or whatever, and all the experiences that we can't fathom as humans must become part of that too. So what does that mean?
I don't want to hog the airtime. What are your thoughts, Susie?
That is very beyond my comprehension. I also like, maybe I could pivot to like my theory that why people don't really think about death, especially like in America. I'm saying America, but like maybe more Western culture, because I never really thought about death growing up, because when we watch TV, we watch movies, people die in it all the time. However, they come back in the next show, the next movie. And then I always thought like, so I became desensitized, and I think many people do too who consume media. They see an actor die in it, then they don't really think about it. Like, they're going to come back in the next show. So that's why we think that death is just like, maybe it's almost like it's not permanent. That's how I thought about it. But and luckily for me, I never had anybody very close to me pass away. My grandparents passed away, but I was never very close with them. And so their absence in my life, I know this sounds horrible, but it doesn't really affect my day to day, because I'm not very close with them. But to think about like somebody that's very close to me that suddenly passes away and they're no longer in my life, I can't really fathom that right now. Yeah. So I think that's what bothers me the most about it.
Here's a quick question for you guys. Growing up, were you the type of kids to, like, when you first learned about death and whatnot, did you believe that actors that died in movies actually died in real life at one point when you were younger? Because some kids do that. Some kids like see someone die in a movie and they think like, oh, they're dead for real. And then it takes a while to catch up. Have you ever heard of that before though, even though you haven't experienced it?
Probably not, because I watch so many things that I just see them right away.
Oh, yeah.
I watched so much TV growing up, and it's like, oh, well, this actor, they died in that show, but they're back here, so they're not dead.
They're okay.
Yes.
Here's something you can make fun of me over. When I was a little kid, and I still watch the WWE from time to time, but when I was a kid, I was like totally into it. And my dumbass thought The Undertaker was really a zombie. I thought The Undertaker was really a dead.
Dude, that guy was scary as shit for a kid. I remember that. Like, no, I could totally. I'm with you, man. I remember like seeing him on TV and just getting chills as a child, and like, this is not something for a kid to watch.
And then my uncle would say, "How the hell is a dead man gonna fight?" So that's
Okay. That made it all better.
Yeah, I know.
I think he's still alive, but like you see him in videos and like talking like a real person. You're like, oh, okay. He's a really nice guy. He's literally just his persona. Can I just, this is random, but if I don't say it, it's going to leave my head and I'm going to forget about it. But Chris, do you remember we talked about, and I'll go into some more detail for Susie, even if you do remember, Chris, but we talked about this one case we stumbled on social media. Like, I think it was a while ago. It was like 4 or 5 months ago. It was this dude who, I think it was just like this white 45-year-old dude who seemed like a nice guy, but he was just like, he had a mustache and glasses. And he was just talking about this experience he had where I think he was like part of saving, like he was a part of a fire crew or something, and he was trying to save somebody, and he had a near-death experience. And this is a good opportunity. We could pivot to near-death experiences after this, but so he was talking about how he died on the operating table when they're trying to save him. And, people talk about these near-death experiences. Like a lot of people report, I think statistically speaking, I looked this up, most people report seeing a white light and going someplace nice and beautiful. And then of course there's the subsect of people who experience the worst thing in their life, hell or whatever the equivalent is. That's something to talk about. But this dude went somewhere different, apparently. You could probably Google this guy really easily based off my story, because it's a really rare story. But he was talking about going to this building that was like white, like shining, like it didn't look like the same type of light we had here, but it also kind of looked like like an old hospital room or whatever. And he was on a gurney or a bed. But he said he was surrounded by these little creatures that looked like elves, I think. And as I'm thinking about this, it's freaking me out, because I don't remember if you recall, recently we also talked to Vic on that one episode we recorded. He was talking about the mushroom elves or whatever that some people experience when they take mushrooms. They see, like, a lot of people report seeing these mechanical looking elves or whatever. But this dude who died momentarily, he reported seeing these creatures standing around him in robes, and they had like an elf like look to them. But then there was this one dude who was like, he looked like the quintessential god figure. Like he was white beard, white hair, but this guy reported that he had like the most warming smile. Like this, it just like this guy looked at me and I just felt calm and happy. This guy was trying to communicate with these things, and he's like, I want to stay here. This feels so good. And then the big white bearded guy was, oh no, you got to go back. You have to, you're not done yet. You have to go back. You have a wife, you have a family. You can't leave yet. And then apparently all the little elves around him were giggling, and they're like, oh, he doesn't remember us. Implying like he had a different life or consciousness before he went to Earth. And
I'm not trying to be a smartass, but
yeah. Am I just describing?
Is he sure? Is he sure he didn't hallucinate going to Santa's workshop or something?
Dude,
talking about a big guy,
I know,
white guy with a beard and elves. Like, what the fuck?
See, this is why we have conversations like this, because it offers a different perspective. It also shines light on how shitty of a storyteller I am. Because if you got the image of Santa's workshop, which I can see how you got from my poorly chosen words, I apologize. That's not at all what he experienced. But okay, let me reel it back in. I'm going off on a tangent too far. The whole crux of the conversation, though, is you have someone who sincerely seems to believe, and he has wherewithal, and he has like Chris, you like to point to the experiences that people have. They seem really well put together. They had families and lives, and they had responsibilities that they seem to mesh really well, and they could speak. So there's some credibility to having that. And even if this was all bullshit, he might very well still believe it. But isn't that interesting that he had a death experience where this is what he saw, that it wasn't a traditional sense of like heaven or hell or even some other weird afterlife. It was like he was going back to another level of consciousness that he had left to come to Earth. And if I'm being honest with you guys, I think that even thinking back all the way to my youth, I had these like weird ideas where, what if we did all come to Earth as an experience? I'm not saying necessarily like virtual reality or for fun, but like, what if we had a larger consciousness pool that we came from, or we had some other existence before this, and coming here is like kind of like a life lesson sort of thing, kind of like South Park, like on Fognall, like, oh, the Mexicans are fighting the the Druids or something. Like it's, I think like all, like we're all so different, and they talk about like people having such a different perspective in the same way that animals go through life, living so differently. Like some are vegetarian, some are carnivorous, some are run in packs, some run as loners, and you can translate that into humanity as well. So there's so many differences. It kind of seems odd that there's such a mishmash. And I always like to think like maybe we came from some original starting point, and this is just a grand experience to be here on Earth together. I don't know. That's just me talking about bullshit.
That's the egg. The egg talks about
exactly.
that. Yeah.
The verse. Yep.
We all started in Santa's workshop. Okay, let me stop being a smartass. But my uncle, when he's retired now, but when he worked at, I think he worked at NBC Studios in like New York City or something, and in Manhattan, and he had a coworker that had, I don't know whether he fell or got hit by a car or something like that, but he had a near-death experience, my uncle's coworker. And my uncle, important detail, is a Hindu. And the coworker, when he had his near-death experience, he said that he died. And for important note that the coworker was, I believe he was Christian, said he died and he saw the elephant god. And he told this story to my uncle, and he's like, yeah, I saw this, like I died and I saw this elephant god and he was talking to me.
Is that Ganesh? Ganesh, right?
And then then my uncle like pulled out like a picture of it, I guess, on his phone. And he was like, yeah, that's the one that I saw. And then after that point, the guy converted to Hinduism.
That's interesting. Was he a white guy?
Yeah, he was.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what his exposure to Hinduism was before that, because not a lot of white Western culture people know much of anything about Hinduism. I think we actually talked about this before, Chris. If you remember, we had conversations about like what does it mean to have people, because we live in a Western society, like very modern Western society, that's very much rooted in Christian culture and Christian religion. So most of the stories you hear floating around are people converting to Christianity because they had some crazy experience after death, where they either went to like hell that was so painful that they had to recant, or they actually met Jesus and like walked around heaven or something like that, and they're like, oh wow, this is so real. But then you don't hear about the stories where, like you just said, like somebody from a different cultural background or religion goes and experiences another religion that is not Christianity. And that's just mind-numbingly crazy to me, that you can have someone having an experience that is so starkly different. And then, of course, you could like, it's always fun to like hear everyone who believes so staunchly in one religion like try to fight back against that. It's like, oh no, it's the devil, or oh no, like you're just mistaken because you grew up in that environment and your mind was poisoned. But in reality, like it's unexplainable why our brains put together these experiences as we're dying. I actually want to flip it back to Susie real quick, because Susie, you said that you kind of had a tiny little bit of a twinge of near-death experience at one point. Would you share that with us?
Well, it wasn't that much of a near-death experience. So I was at a bachelorette party for my friend in Turks and Caicos. We went out one night, and it was a group of girls, and we were trying to figure out a way back to our Airbnb, and we were in the downtown area. It's kind of sketchy, because we're in like a foreign land, Turks and Caicos. But one of the girls decided to kind of trust a random cab driver, and the cab driver said, yeah, he'll take us all back. And when on the way back, we were going to like in the middle of nowhere, like these like weird roads. And then I think he was also trying to be funny. He would shut off the lights on us sometimes, like the headlights a few times. And I got so scared. And I probably also had some drinks. So it freaked me out even more, because I always listen to these kind of stories of being kidnapped and whatnot. And really but it's not a near-death experience, because obviously he dropped us off where we needed to go. But in that moment, my head was going, oh my God, he's going to kidnap us and human traffic us. Like, he has a car full of girls. Yeah, obviously didn't happen. But in my head, that was a near-death experience.
That's equally as terrifying, in my opinion, to be trapped in a car not knowing where you're actually going, and in a country that you're not familiar with.
The mountainside, and yeah, it was like middle of the night too. Like, if he were, because we all had been drinking. If he would have just dropped us off in like a random house in one of their kill houses, that would have been it.
You should have said that while you're driving. Like, where are you taking us, Mr. Man? To one of your kill houses?
Yes.
And then he would have like probably jumped out the car. But so public service announcement, people, don't get into an unlicensed taxi.
Yeah, I actually didn't want to, but I didn't want because the bride's cousin, she was like, yeah, I found him. And then I didn't want to be the difficult one. And that would have been the worst, to die that way.
Oh, yeah.
Because I didn't want to start drama, so I died. That would be the worst.
That's like the what's that movie where Final Destination, there's like the very first Final Destination, like the scene where like she has the vision of like the plane crashing and she doesn't get on the plane and the boyfriend does or whatever, and it's like, I would be the dumbass who like didn't want social awkwardness. I would just be like, oh, vision, what vision? Like, I'll just ignore that, even though it was very clear to me. And then you just like, get in and die too.
Because we're people pleasers. I die from that. That would be the worst. So that's also like what bothers me is like we build this life for ourselves and then we die over the dumbest things. Because I used to watch 1,000 Ways to Die in college, and people die over. I used
to watch that show.
Yes, that's like like people die over the most random things. So I would hate to be one of those people. Like, I built this life for myself, and then I don't know. I guess the one that really in my mind is a girl was doing acupuncture, and then her phone went off. She reached over to grab her phone, and then she fell off the table, and she died from while she had all the needles on her. Like, so that is an example of like a very random and stupid way to go, and I don't want to be that person.
This is okay. So I don't mean to get. I'm so bad about this, but like getting super philosophical. Reel me back in if it's too far. But this is why I say
reeling you back in
already. Come on, man. Fine, I'll just go have my own podcast talking to myself. No, I'm just kidding.
What, the philosophical road? No, don't do
that. I'll just me sitting in the corner and just like, talking in like a fake microphone that I drew on the wall.
You're like Bill and Ted.
My descent into madness.
We're nothing but dust in the wind, dude. And that's the end of your episode.
Just me staring at a wall for 5 hours. So, but this is why I say, like, we have an existence where there are these crazy, stupid, simple deaths that just seem to happen randomly, like, someone having a sign fall on them, or like Susie said, falling off a table, like acupuncture needles, or even, I'm sure there's a million other things we can list out that people have gone. So unfortunately, it's so randomly, it's not like some big disease. It's not some like big car accident. It's just some small little thing. And then what do we say, like, as a culture, as a people? We come up with these stories like the Tengu from Japanese culture, or something like, like a little goblin creature, or like a leprechaun in Irish lore, or fairy. Like, they come along and they just like do something to kill you, like as a prank kind of. And it's these really funny, stupid ways to die. Philosophically, like, you think about, like, if there's free will, then there's free, like, you make free will, but also free mistakes. Like, you make mistakes and you do stupid stuff, but there's also random like things that happen based off of like physics, the wind blowing an old sign loose because the screws and the bolts and nuts are 50 years rotted, and it just happens so that you were walking under that sign as that gust of wind kicked that sign loose. Someone might say, oh, that was the Tengu, or oh, that was an act of God, because it's so random. But if that's true, if there was a force behind it, then is there really any true randomness, because if something can come in and move it from the other side of existence, then all the other instances could either be explained away as like physics, or just having, it's like which one is it? I don't know. That's kind of getting too complicated, but do you know what I'm saying? Like,
So
it's
like
either one or the other.
They were meant to go. Like it's all predetermined.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying I believe that. I'm just saying it has to be one or the other. Like, it has to be either truly random, or it has to be predetermined where something reaches in and affects it from the other side. Because if there is something from the other side reaching in, that automatically negates the concept of true free will, because then everything we do will have that flavor of, like we talked about the butterfly flapping the wing or stepping on a blade of grass 1,000 years ago, having a colossal difference. Think about something reaching into our existence and doing something. Everything going after that would be pushing the humans that came in contact with it, or would come in contact with the outcome, in that direction. So it's almost like the mover did something to guide us in a way that we didn't ourselves choose. So it's like someone who dies from a sign falling on them, or falling off the table with acupuncture needles or whatever. It's like which one? It has to be one or the other. Like, it has to be either our dumbasses succumbing to natural laws of physics, or there has to be some kind of like thing, telling us to reach for the phone, and then not thinking about the consequences of falling off with needles in your skin. I don't know. It's I don't know. That's just how my brain works right now. Feel free to tear that apart if it's stupid.
It's not stupid.
It is idiotic though. No, I'm just kidding.
No, it's just, you hear on the news all the time, like 40-year-old male dies. We're not that far off from 40. We can die. We can die in a few years.
No.
Like, you don't
I'm
think
27, damn it.
Wait, yeah, we talked about this last podcast. We're in our 30s. Like, we think we have our whole life ahead of us, and then something happens at 40 when we're 40, like really random, and we're just gone, and we're just like somebody they talk about on the news for like right before the commercial break, and that's it. That always bothers. That bothers.
The shitty news.
I don't want not even national news. This is local news.
Local news.
Oh,
X person died, and now on to your
exactly.
local cereal commercial.
Exactly.
That's the worst, in my opinion. Like, that's worse. Like, oh my God, you just ruined my day. Like, thinking about that, like, oh, the man, you're like, the person speaking on the news is like doing such a fake. It's just
they
like,
can't
I don't
even
want to
pretend to care. They're just like,
yeah, exactly.
4-year-old man dies on the
reading
way.
Words off pump.
Yeah, something like doing the crossword puzzle at the park. Now for
after a branch falls on his head. Now for your local weather for the weekend.
Exactly. Like, that's it. Like, you hear this stuff all the time, and you don't think about that person. You don't know that person, and nobody knows us, and we're just that. And I can't really accept that. Yeah. It's hard to accept.
We started off pretty morbidly, but it kind of got a little lighthearted, which I like.
Yeah.
I had all the woe is me in the beginning, like turning into the goth. Yeah. But let's go down the morbid road again.
Yes.
So
that's why it's the wandering road.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Plus, we want to shock our listeners into hot and cold, just like, really inundate them with. We just want to confuse our listeners. That's that's our goal.
So, Susie, in the agenda you submitted to us about potential items you wanted to cover, there's one that caught my attention. Theories about death. We touched a little bit on that, about everyone you see is just you born in a different timeline.
Yeah.
But the other one is related to birthmarks and past lives. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a theory that, I've heard about, and I also been on social media because TikTok, everything is valid there. And there's a theory that when people are born with birthmarks are actually an indicator of how they died in the previous life. So that goes back to the reincarnation. And luckily, I don't have any birthmarks, but I also recently, Mr. Ballin, who I talked about, he talked about a story about how a little kid, a toddler, was born, I believe, this is in India, and he always threw a lot of tantrums, and he didn't like the way that their family lived because he was in a poor family, but he's like a 2-3-year-old. How can he know all this? And he had a birthmark on the right side of his ear. And he always told his family that he wants to visit a radio store in this other town. And his parents, like, this is so random. But then one day they went to this radio store, and lo and behold, this was his previous family. So the owner of this radio store died from a gunshot wound from his head. So when they saw this little kid, they saw that that's exactly where the dad died, and the bullet went out the other side. And this is a true story. This toddler grew up and is still alive today, and is a professor at some university. And honestly, stories like this gives me hope, because I would hate to think that when we die, like, that's it. So the fact that there are stories like this that shows reincarnation really gives me hope. Do you guys have any birthmarks?
Well, I must have died from a wound to the ass. No, I'm just kidding. My wife has a birthmark that is like kind of like on her hip. And it's one of those like birthmarks that I think I've only ever seen this type of birthmark on her skin, or it's like really rare. It's like one of those birthmarks that's kind of like differently shaped. It's very abnormally shaped, and it's like a brownish, like it's a little bit browner than her skin. I don't know how to describe it. It's not like a traditional birthmark, I guess. But what about you, Chris? You got any on you?
Yeah, I do. It's kind of like what you described. It's like a little browner than my skin, but it's like on the right. It's on my right knee, but like on the outside of my leg.
Oh, so you died from an arrow to the knee as a centurion.
Now I got put on guard duty.
You were cooking chicken, and the chicken bone fell and pierced your femoral artery.
Took a
we
spear
talked about
to
this
the
like
knee or something like that.
Chris and I joke about this all the time. It's like if we like knew each other in past lives, we were like the two knuckleheads in like the Centurion army who were like trying to avoid like actual combat. We're just like sitting in the trenches and like, here, you rub dirt on me and make it look like we were fighting. Quick, just put some water on your face so it looks like you were like,
it's
sweating.
Oh man. So I've heard that theory before, in which people have said that your birthmarks indicate what killed you in your past life. And then you see certain birthmarks that are like really interesting, or they're like really like pronounced. And then makes you think like, what the fuck? If that's the case, it makes you think like, what the fuck happened to this person in their past life? I don't know how much credence I would give to that, because it could have been coincidental, because you have the story of the little kid that said that he was a fighter pilot during World War II and he knew all these people.
Draw maps.
He was able to draw maps. He was able to identify like the airplane that he said that he died in, and he was able to point out like his squadron members and all this other stuff. And it really wasn't related to birthmarks or anything like that. So maybe they're both true, or maybe that one incident with the kid in India is a coincidence. But see, like we have so many stories of that. It's really hard to pinpoint whether there's legitimacy to that or not.
Susie, can I potentially shatter your world with a question?
I love that. Yes.
Okay. So if you think about it, I swear to God, I shouldn't say this because it's going to ruin anyway, like you said that there's hope in reincarnation, right? And then you gave this story about, the guy dying from a gunshot wound to the head and then coming back as a child and having memories or whatever. But in my mind, like when I hear a story like that, it's kind of like what we talked about earlier. It's like, how is that not death? Like there's still some residual continuation of the former self continuing on, but it seems like most of us, if reincarnation is real, forget almost all aspects of the previous life, with a few exceptions of like, slipping through and remembering some things like some people claim to have. But you, like all of us, when we eventually go, if we do reincarnate into another body, statistically speaking, we're not going to remember this life. So how is that not just death of this life? You know, how, like, this life is ending, all the thoughts and beliefs and feelings and all that stuff is going to be wiped clean, and maybe residual will be left over. But the only escape from that concept that the self doesn't permanently die is the idea, like Chris was talking about, when you get to the other side, eventually when you come to the end of the road of all of your lives, you remember all of them sequentially, or like, together. And it's just a compilation of all your past experiences. But like I was saying earlier, if you're talking about the self, like as we exist in this pocket of time and just everything we know right now, this is going to be gone in one way or another, unless you believe like the Judeo-Christian concept of a permanent eternal afterlife where the self continues on in that realm forever, which is we have to talk about that someday, Chris. There are so many things to talk about with that, but like, what do you think about that, Susie? Does that reel you back at all and like make you more apprehensive, or do you still find like hope and beauty in the idea that even though the self kind of gets recycled and a little bit lost in the next life, that, it continues on in some form or fashion?
Yeah, so I definitely thought about that as well, because like then you're still dead. I don't remember my past life at all. So what's the difference? But I guess the difference is still some people think that like you're more than just your body, like your flesh and blood. You are a soul. Oh, he's gone. Okay. uh, like you are a soul, and it is your soul that goes from like your body right now to the next. And maybe it's more about a set of values, and maybe that's really what lives on. But I feel like that gives me hope, just to, even though I don't remember my previous life, it still gives me hope that maybe I don't just completely go away. A part of me still lives on, whether or not I remember or not.
Yeah, and to go off of that, I mean, if you really think about it, why would you want to remember your past life? A lot of baggage will come along with that if you really think about it. It's like, I don't want to be 3 years old staying up at night thinking about something that stressed me out in my previous existence. So
But what if you knew about like the stock market and like, how to like get ahead of like, oh, I could become a billion. That's how all the billionaires became super rich. We
won't appreciate life as much, and we won't appreciate the present as much if we know for a fact that we have a life coming up. Like we have, like a cat has 9 lives, but if we know that for a fact, we're not going to treasure what we have currently, because we're going to make stupid mistakes knowing that we're going to reborn tomorrow.
Yeah, like if you remember your past life, and in your past life for some reason you were like a princess or something like that and living in this lavish palace, and then you get reincarnated and you're living in friggin' New York City. It's like, what the fuck? I'm gonna be laying in bed thinking about shit. Can I go back to that? Can I go back to what it was before? And yeah, I think it would devalue what you go through right now, because you just be yearning for what you had previously.
See, this is why I think about like whoever is the constructor or the constructors of our reality. I kind of just like imagine a bunch of like higher beings standing around trying to conceive like how we're gonna start the universe and humanity and consciousness. It's like, well, what if we okay, so we don't want them to go away completely. We want them to like learn something. So like, what if we transfer the consciousness to the next life? And then someone chimes, it's like, no. Like if they do that, they're just going to want to kill themselves, because the people who have good lives, they're going to be upset at their new shitty lives, and they're going to remember the past good lives, and they're just going to off themselves, and we're going to get, like, and they're just like, they're trying to plan it out. And then the indicators in this life that they're not completely all knowing and completely able to do everything perfectly is that we do have some slippages. Like, oh, that one guy remembered his past life of getting shot in the head, or this other kid remembered, getting shot down in World War II in his previous life. And it's like, there's some kind of like holes in the nature of how things work, which kind of says to me that whoever constructed it is not like maybe there is more to a plan than that. Maybe the plan is the plan kind of thing. But I don't know. I think that it's also possible that, maybe it's not perfectly, from a perfect all-knowing being, so to speak, which kind of gives some credibility to the idea of like the egg sort of thing. Like everybody's kind of learning as they go along, even like the highest echelons of existence who are trying to get our universal egg to hatch. Maybe they're also learning as well. And we're all just kind of like trying to go through as best as we can.
Something that I also been thinking about is when people, they know they're going to die, like they die of old age, they're on hospice. So recently my husband's grandfather passed away, and so he went to visit him before he passed away. And I think that there's such a thing as called a surge. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, where people, when they're about to die, like of old age, they actually get a surge of energy at the very end. So it gives their family hope. Oh, they're fine, but really but then the nurses and doctors know better, and they know that, oh, that's just a surge. That means they're gonna pass very soon. And I think that's what happened to his grandfather, because he got discharged from the hospital and he was really happy and very energetic about it. And then everybody thought he was going to be fine. And then he passed away a few days later. And then there's also a stage called the death rattle, where they start making noises, like when they're breathing. And all of that was also very dark and morbid to me, because that to be on your deathbed knowing you're going to die, I can't imagine what that's like mentally, but you're too weak to do anything about it. And maybe at that point it doesn't matter anymore, because your consciousness is pretty much almost gone. So that's been on my mind too. I don't know if you guys have thought about that before you go to sleep, but
Real quick, I will say that I have thought about what that would be like. At one point, you're gonna be in a situation where you realize, like, this is it. And you try to imagine how you would feel in that point. And you just feel, for me, it's a bit of anxiety, it's a bit of acceptance. So you can only speculate until you get to that point. But yeah, I have thought about that. And the surge, definitely, yes. I've seen it myself.
You
happen
have?
with other family members.
Oh.
Where it's like, oh, wow. Okay, they were just on life support, but now they're okay. Like, did we cross a point where they're gonna make it through? And then a day later, it's like they're gone. Yeah, definitely one of those things. What about you, Dean? What are your thoughts before I get into the final question here?
I can share two stories. Well, actually, I'll share three. The first one is really short. This is my first experience into death, which was, I think it was my great uncle. I think that was the first person in my life who passed away that my family tried to explain to me what death was, and I was pretty sure I was like 9 or 10, and I think it was open casket, but I wasn't allowed in at that age, which I'm thankful for. Like, I don't know if I would have been able to handle that very well. Seeing my uncle, who I loved very much, laid out an open casket, but that was like the first little exposure to true death that was close to me. And then after that, I did have some older family members, kind of like Susie's story, where like I wasn't really close to them. And, like you go to the funeral and stuff, but you don't really, you don't remember them very well, or you didn't really share a lot of time with them. And you kind of just pay your respects. But then it was like my grandmother and my grandfather, I was pretty close to them growing up. Like, generationally speaking, they were pretty different from me, because I was obviously younger, coming up in the age of the internet, in the 90s and whatnot. And they were still very much part of like the old way of doing things, really. But they, we still loved each other, and we still spent time together. And it's interesting because I'll tell the sadder story first, which no one likes to talk about because it's so hard to discuss, and it adds like an extra flavor of difficulty to the idea of like being on your deathbed. But my grandmother was in hospice for a long time, like longer than we wanted her to be because she was in pain, but she was also struggling with Alzheimer's. And she was like at the last, like towards the end of her life, she didn't know. I don't think she knew any of us really. I still remember like she would see me and think that I was like some man or person that she knew from her childhood, or somebody else in the family. Like she thought I was like the cousin or my cousin or something like that. So that was difficult. And that really made me reflect deeper on the idea of the self, especially when it comes to the idea of death. Because like you can have death of the self while you're still alive. I mean, we see that happen all the time with people who are brain dead. And like that to me is like, that's like the scary, oh my God, that's way scarier to me than just things ending, going into nothingness from yourself. It's like you're still alive, but you're not there anymore. And that's just, anyway. So that's the sad part. But then the more hopeful, interesting, happy part of the story, not happy, but like more bright, is when my grandfather was in the throes of passing away. He was very much aware. He didn't have Alzheimer's, but I didn't get to see him as much in his final days or final weeks because I was off at school. And my mom would like report back to me about, going to see him and how he's doing and all that stuff. And I would wish I was there. But one thing that really stuck with me to this day is that my mom told me that my grandfather would be in the hospital bed. Like this was shortly before he died. He would say things like, "Oh, I see." I think it was like Pap and Quig. And those are like family members that had died, like passed away. He was like saying that he saw them in the corner of the room. And that's so interesting, isn't it? Like, even if you want to be a traditionalist or a realist or whatever, saying that that person is just hallucinating in their final moments, their brain is just projecting images that they're making them comfortable or whatever, but it's really just the brain hallucinating. But even if that's the case, why does the brain choose, or how does the brain even know to do that for the self? Is it purely self-preservation? But there has to be some degree of subconsciousness that we're not aware of, because we can't just conjure, something in the corner of the room and say, I want to see this dead person standing in front of me. Go. That's not how it works. It's like your brain is doing something beyond your conscious control. And this is like an extra twist to the conversation, but like, what if there is like a subconscious level of us that is more tied into the other side, that is helping guide us and make decisions? And in a way, like, we're kind of having to live this dualistic existence with the subconscious self driving our conscious self in order to learn these lessons. I don't know. I just thought that was a crazy concept. It's like like you go to sleep and like your subconscious is like awake and thinking and like how to plan out the next day and calculating all these crazy things. And that's why you wake up and have like weird coincidences, or you go left instead of right. You don't know why, and something happens. Like, that would be a crazy idea for a movie. Patent pending.
Patent pending. But I'll ask the final question of the night, and you could just give a quick answer. What do y'all think happens when we die? I'm hoping that it's not just lights out, that's it. I'm hoping there's some other side in which we get to either interact with loved ones from the past, or we get the ability to reincarnate, or gain all the knowledge in the universe and just go to different places and stuff like that. I'll come to Dean, and then we'll finish off with Susie's answer.
If I had to pick, and I have to always preserve the idea that I don't know. I can never escape that. It's like the Socratic concept of like, I only know that I know nothing sort of thing. I always say that to myself. It's like, I really don't know anything for sure. So therefore I can't like make a definitive decision. But based off of my youth, I don't know about you guys, but like my youth was so integrated with like awe-inspiring reflection, like, sitting outside at night as a kid in like the summer or the spring air. And like when you're younger, you breathe like so much more clearly. Everything is so much more vibrant, and you're really taking in all this information and senses at a level that we just don't have anymore as adults. But like, I remember sitting on my mom's backyard, my childhood home in the backyard, looking up at the stars and just like feeling this unexplainable connection to everything sort of thing. Like kind of almost grasping the universe, like the size and the beauty and the complexity at one, like even as a kid, I had no way to, talk about that. It was just a feeling that I can still kind of grasp, but it was way stronger when I was a kid. So I like to think like when we die, maybe we do like get better clarity, like almost like we can breathe again. And my hope is that all of the dumbass mistakes or the terrible things that we do, even the worst person in life, even the person with like the worst debilitating issues, psychological, violent, or whatever, like they will be able to not only see all that, but they'll also have like a clarity of reflection that makes them go like, oh my God, like I could see now that that was not the way, or like that was out of my control, but it was still bad. And then like when we were kids, we go back to that level of clarity and connection, and there's no more uncertainty or pain or anything. It's just like an elevation above all of that. And then kind of like a return to innocence sort of thing. So if I had to choose one thing I wish or I hope that happens when you die, I would say that.
And what about you, Susie?
I think that the hopeful part of me, we reincarnate, but we go to one of the infinite universes or parallel universe, and we pick up how they live. That's what I hope for. I'll just keep it short.
That actually sounds really nice. So.
Like a Rick and Morty kind of thing.
Right, you got multiple universes.
Yes, just go to one of those.
Yeah. But Susie, we want to thank you once again for being a guest on the show. Could you please tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at Susie Ideally, SUSIE IDEALLY, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all those. I'm on everything except Pinterest.
She's a triple threat.
Really? Thank you guys so much for having me again. I had so much fun, and my podcast will come soon, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and hopefully we get to feature on there as one of your first guests.
As long as you guys have a lot to complain about.
Yeah, we're self-inviting ourselves. But again, thank you, Susie. Thank you, Dean, for this awesome conversation we had today. And I hope the listeners enjoyed today's episode.
Have a good weekend, a bright weekend. Don't let this, don't let this make you depressed.
Don't turn into a goth.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a rating on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please share the show with your friends, as that would help us grow immensely. Also be sure to follow us on social media. You can find us on TikTok at twroadpodcast, our Instagram at twroadpodcast, and our Facebook by searching for The Wandering Road Podcast. If you'd like to get a hold of us, you can reach us at our email address, twroadpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. We would love to have you on the show as a guest so you can share your stories, or you could submit email submissions of your stories that we could dedicate an episode to. Thanks, and we'll catch you on the next one.